Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Um, in case you don't know, my name is Valdi Wiederpass. I am a volunteer along with several other people on the executive committee who basically keep this organization, the Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club, going. And I thank everybody that is volunteering to do that. And what I do want to mention is that we welcome volunteers, and we actually desperately need a volunteer to join our executive committee because we are short a key member, which is somebody that can serve as the secretary to take notes at our executive committee meetings where we make decisions, determine the direction of what we do on the Susquehanna Group, what things we focus on in terms of helping the community prevent harmful things from happening to the environment, and also try to promote good things to happen. So the person that takes minutes would take notes. Our meetings are usually the first Tuesday of every month, except we take a couple of months off in the summer, and we try to keep the meetings to less than two hours. Sometimes we get it done in an hour and a half for those executive committee meetings. And then if you can publish the meeting minutes afterwards and then send them by email to our executive committee members, that helps us a lot because it keeps track of what we're doing, the decisions we made, the votes we took. So please consider applying to join the executive committee by submitting a candidate statement less than or equal to 150 words. The address is in the newsletter that came out. September edition was put out a week ago, roughly, and it's a beautiful edition. Again, it's Susquehanna Sierra, and it looks like this. It's got a lot of good stories. We had 3 good events in August. There was also a couple of outings where we learned about the Southern Tier Land Conservancy and the Kanawha Nature Preserve. Also, there was a visit to the pollinator garden at the Confluence Park in Binghamton. And I thank you to everybody that helped answer questions at tables. Christina Fuller did that for us for our Move Out project at Binghamton University's University Fest. Scott Loffer and I did it at the Indivisible Binghamton's Climate and Science Fair. And Joanne Lettuce, Jim Taft, and Maura Ashley did it at the Binghamton 2 Degrees event at Confluence Park. That was at the end of August. So thank you to everybody that helped us with that. Locally, we have an industrial park that is planned by the Broome County Industrial Development Agency. There was a meeting last week, I think, at Johnson City High School, and they put out a draft scoping document to decide or take input on what they're going to be reviewing for the draft generic environmental impact statement, which is part of the State Environmental Quality Review Act. It's a formal process. Anything that's a big project has to go through that review. So they're asking for public input. So if you care about this project, care about how that might influence our community of Broome County, if you don't like where it's located, for example, a lot of the residents in the area don't like the idea, and our club as well, it doesn't really like the place that was chosen. It's the corner of East Main Road and Airport Road, 500 acres they want to take and cut down a lot of trees and do a lot of terraced moving of earth to build this huge industrial park. So those comments are due by the 24th. They're accepting them from the public. So I encourage people to submit comments. Also, the New York State legislative session ended in June, and only one major climate-related piece of legislation was passed, and that was the Climate Change Superfund Act. We would like people to contact Governor Kathy Hochul's office and urge her to sign this Superfund Act, and also the ban on CO2 fracking, which was passed over 6 months ago now in March. New York State is 3 years behind on its 2030 climate goals. There's a story about that in the September issue of our newsletter, the Susquehanna Sierran, and there's a nice graph with a lot of information about what's going on with New York being 3 years behind, and what the relative costs are for various sources of energy. So this is a good source of information, and unfortunately, New York State now is trying to push, or at least consider, nuclear power, which is a real royal waste of money. It's dangerous. They still haven't figured out what to do with the nuclear waste, the nuclear fuel rods once they're depleted. And so adding that would delay even further and just occupy a lot of time and probably raise costs even more. So it makes no sense to consider nuclear now that we're so far behind. But yet the governor is now considering that. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. Yeah, they were working on that. Forgot what that was called now, Yucca Mountain, and they spent billions of dollars on it. Burrowed some huge tunnels, but they gave up on it many years ago now. So that's kind of in limbo. Also, there is some good news, which is good. I want to provide good news too. The good news is that Broome County received designation officially September 10th last week as being certified now as a bronze climate smart community after the county completed 39 actions, including use of renewable energy, working on climate adaptation policies and programs and projects, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they had to tabulate that and prove that they are doing that, electrification of transportation, and many other steps too. So that's good news. So I'm happy to report that. And that also is partly due to membership of Sierra Club and the Susquehanna Group influencing what Broome County is doing over many years. Thank you. We've got an event coming up that Broome County hosts every year. Saturday, October 19th is the annual Riverbank Cleanup. It's sponsored by the Broome County Environmental Management Council. And what's involved there is hands-on. You get to pick up trash and debris along the rivers of Shenango River plus Susquehanna River near Confluence Park and Southside Parks in Binghamton. The meeting place is Conklin Avenue near Washington Street Bridge at 9 a.m. Again, this is October 19th. If you have questions, please contact Scott Laufer by email, and that email address is in the newsletter too, I believe. Yes.
Scott contacts Shenango Trout Unlimited. They'll help with volunteers.
Oh yeah, well, that's good. Thank you.
Well, you guys should contact the EMC.
Yeah, spread it to, maybe if you can share your, with your membership and let them know that. Okay, very good. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not a member up there.
Oh, you're not?
I know that.
Oh, okay. Well, that'll help.
You do that cleanup.
If you know who to send it to, that helps us. Yeah. Thank you very much.
They do the West Branch. They won't. They do the West Branch.
No, it's in Broome County.
Oh, this is Broome County in Binghamton.
Oh, Shenango.
Shenango River and Susquehanna River. Yeah. All right. Also coming up in October, we've got the regular general membership meeting is we're going to have Devin Bialy of Cornell Cooperative Extension talking to us via a presentation about smart energy choices and incentives. And then November 19th at our general membership meeting is going to be Renee Secor. That's a virtual only, via Zoom only. So no in-person meeting, but this is about coyotes. It's called Project Coyote. And then for December 17th, we're trying to line up Michelle Knupfer of Waterman Conservation Education Center to talk about bird-friendly backyards. And that's not totally set yet, but we're trying to get that to happen. So if you want to see what's going on locally, there's an event calendar. That's at sierraclub.org/Atlantic-Susquehanna/events. What else? I guess that's all I had for announcements, unless somebody has something else.
The 2020 25 calendars are in.
Oh,
And
right.
I think in the newsletter is the thing to fill out, just mail it to the PO box, we'll get it to you.
Yes, in the last, it's probably the last page of the newsletter, there's a form. So if you fill out that form, you can order a calendar. So if you're interested in that, please let us know and send those orders in. And also there's and Joanne can collect orders, I guess, at the next meeting too. So if you don't want to mail it. And then there's also an address for sending in your candidate statement if you want to join us to volunteer as an executive committee member to help guide our the direction of our group.
Wednesday, I sent out, if you're on Vestal Nights, Wednesday, I sent out the notification for Vestal and Johnson City on the waste management plant, what they're gonna do up there. I hope everybody got it, if they're on Vestal Rights Organized.
I don't remember.
I'm sure Scott, if you're on that or not. I know Elaine is, maybe you were too, Val.
Maybe I just haven't checked out the email yet. I get a lot of emails and I've been very, very busy over the last couple of weeks. With planning meetings beyond this Sierra Club, helping to plan the protest and press conference at the Governor's Future Energy Economy Summit in Syracuse, which was September 5th. There were a lot of meetings to organize that event. That was a huge effort.
You have a good turnout?
Pretty good. I would say there were about 85 people that showed up and were generally very enthusiastic about protesting it. And we were happy that the speakers did an excellent job too. Bob Howarth was one of the speakers. He's with the Climate Action Council, and he's a very respected researcher and professor at Cornell University. He's done a lot of research on methane, fugitive methane emissions, adding to the climate change problem. So he came out of the conference in the middle of the conference, and he wasn't allowed to speak officially inside the conference, but he spoke to reporters outside the conference against nuclear power and for speeding up renewable power and storage in New York State.
Did Anthony and Frank come?
No. So anyway, with all that said, any other things that I left out or anybody want to bring up?
Baldy, just a question, Julian on Zoom.
Yes, Julian.
Just, has the newsletter actually gone out?
Well, it's on our website. So this is
Oh, okay.
it's a online, go to our website and it's under newsletter tab. It's there.
Yes, yes, thanks. I usually get an email and I didn't have one, so.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Scott just said, oh, yeah. All right. Well, anyway, sorry we didn't send a notification, but now because we just told you.
Thank you,
So,
yes.
Sorry.
It's okay.
All right.
We miss you and Lee.
Yeah. So with that said, I do appreciate everybody's membership. And if you haven't let us know your email address, please let us know so we can keep you updated.
Is that Jerry Wiley?
Yes, welcome. So also, just in general, there's a lot of things going on. Boy, this is a busy time of year and it's not going to get any better next year either. Yes.
That's a deadline.
Yep.
Child has to go to bed. Can we do the
Yes,
rest of the
yes,
announcements?
yes. Yeah, in fact, I just want to introduce her now. So we welcome Rachael Cornick, who we are happy to have here tonight. And I'm not even going to read her biography. She's a chemical engineer. She's also a singer. She's done a lot of work in renewable energy, and she's living locally here. And thank you, Rachael, for being here.
So welcome everybody online. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Baldy. Thank you, Sierra Club, for having me. I'm extremely passionate about clean energy, as Baldy mentioned. I've been in renewable energy for like 7 or 8 years now, developing solar and storage projects. And more recently, I did a stint for 3 years doing smart grid deployment. So essentially deploying control systems on the distribution network in order to more easily connect renewables to the grid. So I've done both of those things. And I'm an adjunct professor at Binghamton University, and I teach a clean energy course. So that's my background. My first 5 years was in chemicals. I was in industrial gases. And the reason that I chose the company that I went with was because they were on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for 8 years, which was unheard of for a chemical company. So I've always been really passionate about the environment and the way that like I want to move the needles with clean energy. So today's presentation, as you can see, is about New York's energy transition. So I'm going to build off some of the things that Valdi talked about earlier and is in the newsletter. I'm going to give you guys sort of a brief overview of the Climate Act and some of the important milestones since the Climate Act, and then talk about some of the challenges that are keeping us from getting to our goals. And then some information about clean energy deployment. What I normally do, or what my expertise is in solar and batteries. So I do touch on the other technologies, but I've never actually developed them myself. So I'll get started. You guys, if you do have questions, feel free to ask. There's going to be a lot of information on the slides. I'm going to breeze past some of it just in the interest of time, but we'll hopefully be able to get through a good chunk of it. You guys all hear me okay online?
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Great.
coming through well.
Great. Okay, so the climate plan, which you can see on this first line, it's also known as the it's mainly known as the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I am going to call it the climate plan because that's much easier. So some of the key goals are 100% zero emission electricity by 2040. So that includes renewables and nuclear, because we do have nuclear in the state now, right? And then the second goal is 70% of the state's electricity will be generated by renewable energy by 2030. That is only renewables, that excludes nuclear. And then some of the specific targets are, they want to deploy 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035 and 10 gigawatts of solar by 2030. In addition, they have an energy storage goal, which is deploying at least 6 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030. Energy storage is particularly important because renewable energy is intermittent, right? The sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing. So when those things are fluctuating, you need to, as you add more renewables to the grid, you need to have a way to stabilize it, and to be able to interject energy to the grid really quickly when the load on the grid or the energy consumption is really high and the generation is low. So solar or storage is a really fast way to discharge energy into the grid when there's fluctuation in renewable energy. There is also an economy-wide net zero emissions goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 85% below 1990 levels. I'm not going to speak about that too much today because there's too much to cover. And then the other major thing is that there's an equity and justice component. So they plan to allocate a minimum of 35% with a goal of 40% of the benefits of clean energy investment to go towards disadvantaged communities. So those are kind of the key goals of the Climate Act. And then those are just the objectives. There's something called the scoping plan that was created to essentially roll out and describe how to execute and get to the goals. So this is sort of the, oh, that's right. The scoping plan. So the Climate Act was passed into law in 2019, and then there was 2 years of public meetings, feedback. There were about 32 meetings. And then in 2022, the scoping plan was finalized at the end of 2022. And then the next steps for the scoping plan are to create a state energy plan, which is the energy plan that New York State has had historically. It's more of a guidance document, whereas the Climate Act is actual law, like we have to hit the goals. And so that's the energy plan is happening right now. And then they have a requirement to basically do a 5-year review of the scoping plan. And so the report that I have pulled most of my material from is the biennial review. And it basically describes the goals, the status of where we are for each technology, and then how the challenges that they're having, and then how they're going to close the gap. The Climate Action Council is the council that basically is in charge of the scoping plan. And one of the main people on the Climate Action Plan is Doreen Harris. She's the CEO of NYSERDA. And NYSERDA is a critical organization. They're one of the ones, the NYSERDA and DEC are the two that are basically in charge of managing most of the programs around the Climate Act. So NYSERDA, are you guys familiar with NYSERDA? Yeah, okay, all right. So I'll skip that. But all right, so we have the Climate Act in 2019, the scoping plan that's approved at the end of 2022. And then in July of 2024, so this year is when they came out with the Clean Energy Standard Biennial Review. So the scoping plan covers sector-specific recommendations like electricity, transportation, buildings, industry, agriculture, waste, land use, etc. Right? The thing that I was going to cover tonight is mainly electricity, but I just wanted to mention transportation. So, the goal is to have nearly all vehicles be zero emission technology by 2050. And so the reason that's important is because if everybody is driving EVs, they're plugging them in at home, and EVs take a lot of power to charge. I have a Nissan Leaf. When I plug that thing into my house at home, it uses about 7 kilowatts, which is probably more than the maximum of power that you would use at any time in your house. It's substantial. So that's going to add a lot of load to the grid, which means that we have to deploy even more clean energy to reach our goals. The other thing is that there's a goal for buildings by 2050 to have 85% of the homes and commercial building space electrified. So again, we're talking about using heat pumps and electrifying stoves and everything. So that's increasing the electricity load on the grid. So that's like some of the things regarding the scoping plan. Oh, this is going to be a tough one. Okay, so just to describe without the picture. So what I have here is New York ISO is the independent system operator. They are the organization that oversees the grid, the market of the grid, and also they control the supply and demand across New York State, right? They are in contact with all the utilities, all of the generators, and they oversee the entire electricity grid of New York. And I have this really awesome picture because it shows the real-time load of the entire state and the loads of individual counties. So you can see at any moment how much energy we're using as a state and as a county. So the other thing that New York ISO has is a really awesome interactive graph of New York State that shows the real-time pricing and the day ahead market pricing, which is basically the wholesale market price of electricity at any time. I took a snapshot of today, and at that moment it was $34.97 per megawatt hour. So it's essentially like the cost that the wholesale generators are being paid to generate electricity. And so for our purposes, your electricity bills are generally based on kilowatt hours. So that's more like 3.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's what they're getting. That's the cost of the wholesale energy. Some other important items to put everything in context is there's a clean energy standard, and that's the program that basically it's how the state is able to solicit renewable energy contracts. Another important item is that the state expects electricity to double by 2050 in the state, mainly because of electrification and also things like data centers, which use a lot of energy. And then another really important fact is that they expect that all of the changes required for the Climate Act will create about 200,000 jobs across all the sectors in New York. And 113,000 of those would be in electrification. So deploying renewable energy, just renewable energy and transmission, upgrading transmission. So as Valdi had mentioned in the newsletter, we are pretty far away from our goals, our 2030 goals. Right now, the total renewable supply, okay, this is in 2022. In 2022, renewables supplied 25% of the state's electricity load, and we need to hit 70%, right? So we're pretty far away. It's 2024. We have 6 years to basically get there. And the plans that are, yeah, go ahead.
So how much is solar and how much is?
Yep. So solar is, so the highest portion of renewable energy is hydroelectric. Like I'm looking, I have the actual gigawatt hours, so I don't know the percentage. Actually, do I have the percentage here? Hold on. Yeah, I do. So I'm not sure if this is from 2023 or 2022, but essentially hydroelectric is 86%, and solar is 6%, and wind, land-based wind, is 8%. They're anticipating with the contracted pipeline of renewables, they're expecting to have an additional 27% of utility scale solar, 30% of offshore wind. And then they also have an 18% of additional hydroelectric, which I'm not exactly sure where that is coming from. I know that there are smaller hydroelectric plants like on rivers and stuff like that. But I was under the impression that most of those plants already existed. So I'm not exactly sure where the hydroelectric is coming from in the future, but they say it's coming. Yeah.
They're gonna bring it down back. That's one plan.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
It's
that's
not generated in New York.
right.
You're talking about what's generated in New York.
We are. They do stipulate later about, energy that's coming from outside of New York State's borders. So they account for that in some way, but I'm not entirely sure how. Skip that. Okay, so some of the challenges, I focus on like 3 or 4 of them because they're the ones I'm most familiar with. One of the biggest ones is supply chain, right? So COVID on, there are all sorts of upsets in the supply chain. The other thing is that China is way ahead of us as far as solar and battery manufacturing are concerned. So 80% of global polysilicon capacity is from China. And then additionally, we have, complex federal policies, and then we have tariffs, which are, in and out, depending on the candidate, depending on the president, right? Which doesn't lead to a very stable environment for any industry that has tariffs, fluctuating. And so that has somewhat stabilized recently. And the renewable energy has increased in deployment, since end of COVID. So supply chain issues are starting to resolve, but certainly it's still an issue. In one specific case, transformers are the lead time for transformers just catapulted. So if you want a transformer for a project, which is pretty frequent that you need a transformer, it's about a 2-year lead time. So you've got to develop your project, determine that it's even worthwhile, get some of the permits, and do the design, and then do the interconnection agreement. And if the utility says, oh, no, we've got to upgrade the transformer, well, then they have to go purchase one. And if they don't have them, in-house, then it's a 2-year lead time, right? And so that project's not getting developed for 2 years. And the cost is also astronomical now. What I saw was that the prices have gone up to 900% of where they were at. So transformers are a big deal. It's a huge supply chain issue. So some of the good things, right, is we have the Inflation Reduction Act, implemented by Biden-Harris, about 2 years ago. And that's incentivized domestic production, right? There's a lot of incentives for manufacturing, which will encourage our supply chain domestically. Certainly, we've seen that in New York a lot. New York is sort of a battery hub now. And we have a battery manufacturing plant in Endicott at Huron campus. And then I think there are other companies that have labs and stuff that are doing R&D for batteries. So another challenge is permitting. Depending on the size of the project, there are different groups that do permitting. So if you have a project that's greater than 25 megawatts, it goes through the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And historically, some of those projects have taken, on average, three and a half years to permit a large, like, utility scale project. And so they are in the process of trying to streamline the permitting process so that the permits will take within a year to complete or be approved from the date of application. Or if it's on a brownfield or a landfill, it would take even less, 6 months, because they want to incentivize developers to build as much on brownfields and landfills that we're not going to do much else with anyways. So the permitting application process should be even shorter for that. Unfortunately, with all these things, like, it takes time to implement. So it'll be a couple years before this we see the benefits of some of the streamlining of these permitting processes. The other challenge is local permits, right? So, Evaldi just talked about the industrial park, right? And anytime you have some sort of development, you have to get several permits, and at least for solar and renewables, it can depend on the county, can depend on the town. Sometimes there's really no permitting process, and sometimes there's a very intense permitting process, right? And that's dependent upon the state. In New York, I'm not as familiar. Most of the projects I've actually built are in Illinois. And I know that in some jurisdictions, it's really quite easy. And in other jurisdictions, it can take, months to get it across, sometimes like over a year. So, you've got federal permits, you've got state permits, you've got local permits, environmental permits and studies. Obviously, all these things are important, but if you are trying to reach clean energy goals, all these things take time, right? And are going to slow down your deployment. So another thing that makes it harder is, like, a lot of the sites that are really suitable for renewable energy have been taken, right? So the easy spots, the ones where it's sort of easiest to deploy and aren't maybe closer to towns, or you don't have to cut down trees, right? Like, a lot of those spots have been taken up. And as we add more regulations in different areas, it makes it even harder. So one of the examples is right now there's a freshwater wetlands protection, which protects wetlands from 12.4 acres and above. And as of 2028, it'll go from 7.4 acres and above. Now, I am all for protecting wetlands, right? 100%. But there are things like this that are going to make it even harder for us to develop renewables in New York State. And so we're going to have to make some hard choices, right? Like, do we want to try to mitigate climate change and decarbonize, or, do we want to save this chunk of trees, right? Like that's going to happen in some cases, although there are still a lot of property and a lot of land that can be developed. And one of them is agricultural land, or farming land, which I want to talk more about. Oh, it's on this side. Okay, yeah. So agricultural lands are often really perfect for solar. They're flat. They're, there are no trees. And the state does try to, they want developers to focus on like the worst farmland, if you will, right? But one of the things that I found really interesting, I listened to a podcast that is run by, give me one second, I'll tell you the name. Yeah, it's called Plugging In. It's by the Alliance for Clean Energy. And they did it's like a 15-minute podcast on solar siting. And one of the things that I learned from this podcast is that even if we reach our New York State solar goals, it would only take about 2% of the farmland that we currently have. And additionally, a lot of that farmland isn't necessarily being farmed because farmers can't always make a living on it. So solar is one of the ways that they can subsidize their farms, right? They can actually make decent money from leasing their land, and then they can use that money to farm other pieces of property. The other thing that I found really interesting is that currently 40% of the corn crop in New York is for ethanol. So that's like several million acres. So, and this was like mind blowing to me. So 1 acre of farmland of corn results in 10,000 miles of driving from ethanol in one season of corn production. So 10,000 miles. If you put solar on the same acre, you get 1 million miles of driving. It's 10 times. So, even if we removed all of the ethanol and put solar on those properties, like it would be a huge benefit. So, it's just important to note that we are already using a lot of the farmland for energy production, and it's not necessarily the energy production that is most beneficial to us now. All right, bringing it back to.
There's a lot of other problems with the ethanol because corn is very water intensive.
Mm-hmm.
And also they use a lot of pesticides. And herbicides.
Right, exactly.
Nitrogen out of the soil. So
Mhm.
Continue to grow corn. Difficult to grow other stuff, so you might as well use it for soil.
Right. And so this is another thing that they brought up, is that the thing is when you put solar on a property, you decommission it after 25 or 30 years. Most states, and I'm sure New York is one of them, requires that that's part of the contract, right? You have to decommission it. So essentially you put the solar panels on the property, you are planting native plants, right? And the soils basically regenerate over 25 years. So then they're ready to actually be farmed potentially more easily at that point. Yeah.
So when decommission means you take the solar off
Yeah. So
and
once,
you bring it back into agricultural
Mhm.
production.
yeah, if the farmer wants to, right?
And
Like,
the panels are probably not good for more than 25 years anyway.
so that's the lifetime that they generally say, but in reality, they could go for 35, 40 years. They're just going to have lower production. So solar panels degrade by about 0.5, I think it's 0.05% a year. So I might be off by a decimal point. So yeah, they could probably go for 40 years.
So do they have to decommission if the farmer doesn't want to?
No. I mean, so generally the contracts say that the contract goes for 25 years, but then there's an option to continue for 5 or 10 years, right? If it's still doing well. Yeah.
Would the payment to the farm for the solar panels be equivalent or more than what they're getting for their ethanol?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know how much they get paid for ethanol, but I mean, I don't know. My expectation is that solar would be higher, but I don't know. Good question. Yeah.
When you say developers, are you talking about private firms or
Yeah.
like NICE or?
Oh, good point. So when I say developer, I mean, there's generally a company like the company that I worked for, that is the company that first thinks of the idea, right? So the way that we work is we'll go try to find a piece of land. We'll try to talk to the landowner, see if it's suitable for solar. We are the ones that provide the financing. We're a private company, right? We're the ones who are providing the financing, paying the farmer for the lease, doing all of the permitting, doing the environmental assessments. We will hire an installer to actually do the construction. So they'll do the design, but we would oversee that process. We would oversee the construction. And then at the end of the construction, when the plant goes live, some developers will own the solar and some developers will sell it to an investor who will basically manage it for the life of the project. So does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
and this counts for New York State's overall production.
Mm-hmm.
Does it matter which state is it in?
Yes. So it has to be in New York State. Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about this briefly before, that there might be some, if we're getting, hydroelectric power from Canada, that might go towards the goals, but I don't know how. I'm not sure if it's like, if they count all of it or not. So, any other questions on?
Rachel, you mentioned the external legal threat of possible federal government, depending on the political climate, we could possibly overturn this apple cart. And what studies have you done on possible terrorism into the grid? especially on New York State?
Yeah. Great question. So, cybersecurity is just top priority for utility companies. So, one of the projects that I did with this smart grid company is we worked with a utility, Avangrid, RG&E, and NYSEG, two separate projects. And the idea was to be able to control these 3 different 5-megawatt solar plants that are on the distribution grid, which generally is not controlled, right? Like, and the utility doesn't necessarily pay attention to like the solar that's on your house, right? They don't see that. They don't know that that's coming into the grid. They can meter it, but they're not paying attention to it on like, in their control room. So, when I did this project, we're a controls company, so we had to talk to their control system. And I can tell you that there was I'm going to guess 100 to 150 different specific requirements outlining cybersecurity requirements, specifications that we had to align with and also prove. So I'm not saying all utility companies are that way, but certainly, RG&E, Avangrid, I mean, it is a main priority and they spend a lot of time focusing on it. But no question that there are other utilities, especially like co-ops that aren't necessarily well-funded, that might be more at risk for something like that. Yeah.
Rachel?
Yeah.
We can hear you very clearly, but we on Zoom can hardly hear the audience questions.
Sure.
So maybe you could repeat them briefly.
I will from now on. Sorry about that. Okay, so coming back to it. So, another part of the process is that adding all of this energy requires transmission upgrades. We need transmission upgrades for 2 reasons. One, our infrastructure is really old and we need to replace a lot of things as it is. And also adding this much clean energy to the grid in specific places requires new transmission lines. Woo. Are you almost there?
Like something, I don't know what slide you're on though.
I am,
Real-time dashboard.
there you go.
I see it.
Click on that one. And keep going, click on that one. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Yay! Well done, Valdi.
And I think you might have to use the mouse and actually pick them, because I don't know how else to do it, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. All right, can you guys online see the presentation now? Oh, you're here.
Yes.
Woo! Okay. So great. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, so just talking about transmission upgrades. The Public Service Commission has identified the need for both bulk transmission and local system upgrades through the coordinated grid planning process. They have over 5 billion in local transmission upgrades have been approved. And that's just for, that's the Public Service Commission. There are other things like this Clean Path New York project. It's an $11 billion renewable energy project that comprises, 3.8 gigawatts of wind and solar. And then if you see here, a new 175-mile underground and submarine transmission line. Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to make it bigger. Okay. So, excuse me. So the transmission piece is really important. I mean, it's how we connect the renewable energy to the grid. And there's also permitting struggles with that as well. And if you have to build new transmission, right, then there's that whole issue as well, right? Trying to find the land and the property to build those, to do those projects. Okay, so this is talking about the interconnection process. Let's see here. Did we cover all this? Yeah, okay. So one of the, is that, I don't know where this is coming up, it doesn't matter. So New York ISO, they're the ones who manage the interconnection process for the really large utility scale projects. And you can see here that some of the projects have faced delays of 3 to 4 years on average because of long study times, because of lack of resources, and just probably an influx of a lot of projects, right? They're not used to seeing thousands of projects, or I'm not sure how many they have, but certainly hundreds coming in, and they have to review every single project to see, what components on the grid need to be upgraded, how they're going to be upgraded, what the costs of those things are. So, I mean, it's not an easy study to do. And the way that it works, let's see. Yeah, let me see here real quick. Okay. So the way that interconnection works for at least commercial scale projects, which are 5 megawatts and smaller, and 5 megawatts is about 25 acres for solar. Okay, just to give you an idea of how much space that is. So 25 acres. The way that it has been traditionally done is if you have a project, you develop to a point where you know that, okay, the design is good, I've got the land, and then you have to submit that to the utility. And the utility looks at the first one that comes in. They look at it, they review it, they say, okay, either, we have a lot of capacity on the substation. You don't have to upgrade anything. So maybe some couple things here and there. It's $50,000, right? Well, the next person who applies, well, that substation has no more capacity. And they will be responsible potentially for 5 million, right? And so the project dies. And so that, that's it. So in Illinois, I've actually experienced this. I did 10 different interconnection applications for 10 different community solar projects. I think 8 of which were all the same size, 2 megawatts. And one of them, the interconnection costs were $50,000. And one of them, the interconnection costs were 5 million. Same size project, same utility, just different parts of the grid. So like as a developer, you can imagine you're developing these projects and you're like, there's a huge risk leading up to the interconnection application because you are in the dark about how much it is going to cost. Now, some of those things are changing, and that's one of the recommendations that people have about transparency. In Illinois, and this might be true for New York, I haven't had a chance to look it up, but they actually have a map that shows you the transmission lines, and you can like scroll on it and it'll say, this has about this much capacity, and same with the distribution lines. So you can at least have an idea of where you might want to build. Like if there's a, part of the grid that is very clearly, at its max, you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to spend the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to get the review done because there's a cost associated with that. So one of the great things that is happening is this is a FERC order. So this is a federal organization that monitors electricity from state to state. And they are responsible for a lot of the federal rules around electricity, around the electrical grid. And what they are having utilities do is this cluster-based approach. So all of the plants or the solar or wind or whatever it is that are applying to a specific area on the grid or have their interconnection application in queue, the utility will look at all 5, 6 of them at one time. And essentially they'll say, okay, if we want to do all 6 of these projects, what is that going to cost to upgrade the entire system? And then they distribute those costs to all 5 or 6 developers who are trying to build the project, which makes it a lot more palatable, makes it a lot more fair as a developer, and should speed up the process. So that was certainly a good change. That's it. That's it. Exactly. You aren't taking on as much risk because they're incentivized to, I'm just trying to say they might be incentivized to distribute the, never mind. I lost my thought. Okay. So, this is another cool thing. So another thing that NYSERDA is doing is, as I was telling you guys, there's this whole long process of developing a project, and it can fail at any point along the way, right? Permitting, environmental, you've got an endangered turtle, right? Like whatever it is, right? Like there are all sorts of things that can make the project fail. And this Build Ready program is essentially NYSERDA is going to secure development rights to underutilized properties and do a bunch of that work themselves. And then the properties are ready to go for developers, and it will go through a competitive bid process. So it takes the risk off the developer and puts it on the state. And so that also could potentially speed up the process. Yeah.
So securing development rights on underutilized properties, what does that mean? Does that mean like taking the rights away from the individual owner?
Oh, no. I mean, all of these things have. Yes. Okay. So the question, thank you. So, right, eminent domain. So the question is, can NYSERDA basically force an individual to develop a project and impose eminent domain, right? Is that fair? This program is not that. I'm not saying there aren't other programs that can do that, but this one, I believe would probably have to be on sort of state land, or it would have to be, the owner would have to want to do the project, which is always the case, like with developing projects, renewable energy projects, the landowner has to want to do it. So what?
Or the sell.
Yeah, that's true. So some developers, some investors will actually purchase a property. I think generally they lease it because it is only for 25 or 30 years. So that's generally what I see as leasing. Okay, so now I'm just going to go over some of the capacity that we have deployed in New York State so far for the different technologies. So this is really cool. This is on NYSERDA's website for solar and for batteries. I don't think they have it for wind yet. You can look at the capacity that has been deployed for each one of those technologies, and you can do it by county. So the state has installed almost 5.9 megawatts or 5.9 gigawatts of solar power, which is, almost the 6 gigawatt goal of 2025. So that's great. This is the one goal that we're like, likely going to achieve. And so that's pretty exciting. These graphs sort of show cumulatively how much solar we have deployed since I don't remember what the year is. They say it on the website. And then this shows the year by year deployment of solar. Yeah, yeah, 10 years, right. So the thing that is excluded from this is utility scale. I don't think there have been that many utility scale solar projects built so far. So this is mainly projects that are 5 megawatts and smaller, and it is mainly community solar. So, oh, this is Broome County's. So we have 34 megawatts of solar projects, and there are about 598 of them. So in case you're curious about Broome County, you could see, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I just saw one that I had never seen before, and I'm wondering about it. It was up behind the Glenwood and St. Michael's cemeteries off Glenwood Road.
Okay.
It looks pretty good size. I
Mm.
don't know, 5 acres.
Okay.
7 acres. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yep.
Just see it coming down the road and then you can't see it.
I had not seen it until I went for a walk the other day and was up in the cemeteries, and then I saw it, and I just wondered about that one.
And where is it near again?
It's, I'm sure that to get into it, it's off Glenwood Road.
Okay, so there she's talking about a solar project that was just
It's pretty new. You can
pretty new,
tell.
yeah, off of Glenwood Road. Is that what you said? Yeah, okay. So New York State is a leader in community solar. I love community solar. It's the thing that I've developed most in my career. Are you guys familiar with what it is? Some? Okay.
I was gonna do this on my land.
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah.
And the transmission line, again, I don't remember the size of the plan.
Uh-huh.
It was ETM solar taken up.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And what they said, because of the transmission line, it would have to be half the size.
This is the interconnection thing. So they,
I looked at it like it was a neighborhood thing.
mm-hmm.
I got a little land. Now, it wasn't big. It wasn't, they have an 18-acre field.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only gonna be maybe a half acre,
Yeah,
I think, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And it didn't, I don't know, it didn't fly because they couldn't make enough money.
right.
Something happened that way.
Yep.
So are the you're saying those kind of plans are welcome? Cause I would be interested in.
Yeah, so
Kind of relook.
for sure. So, so a couple things. We have tons of community solar in New York. We're a leader in the United States.
Community solar is defined by small.
Nope. So community solar is generally they're smaller. They're generally like 5 megawatts and smaller, but they could be 100 kilowatts. Really, the whole idea of community solar is that you have a project on a piece of land, and you have basically a digital agreement.
Yeah, I think that if I remember correctly, mine was 90. The result was gonna be
Okay.
80,
Yep.
94.
Yep.
So
Mhm.
that's, again, the community, anybody can use it,
Right.
but I was looking at it more like a neighborhood thing, talk to the neighbors.
Uh-huh. Oh, I see what you're saying. You're doing your own community solar project. Yes. Okay. So we have a member in the audience who has looked into doing a solar project with ETM, which has a new name now, I believe. Solar Grid. Thank you. Solar Grid, a local solar company whose building is in Endicott. And he was looking to do a community solar site, but wasn't familiar with what that is. You were thinking like you would have your neighbors sort of chip in and you would all use the solar. So that's essentially what it is, but it's a contractual agreement, because you don't actually, when you have community solar, the electrons just go on the grid. They aren't going to your house physically. So it's just it's a contractual agreement. You can sign up for a community solar plant.
I also.
Nice. Nice. So you can, I mean, the idea with community solar is that you can subscribe to a community solar site. They kind of see how much consumption you have in your house, and then they will give you generally 10% off of your electricity bill. That's the standard amount. And you can see these are all the sites in New York. There are, like hundreds. And you can, this is on NYSERDA's site. So you can go find a community solar site. So this is one of the things I tell people, like, if you want to do something to help with climate change and you haven't subscribed to a community solar site, it's one of the best things you can do, because you're getting your energy from community solar, and also it incentivizes the developers to develop more of it, right? And this shows you everything. You just click in the area and you can find a bunch of different community solar sites. Yeah.
So aren't there two ways to participate in community solar? You can buy panels, or you can
subscribe.
You can
Mhm.
subscribe to them as an ESCO, an energy supply company,
Mhm.
and you can get usually like 5 to 10% discount on your electricity bill.
That's right. That's right. So you can do both. Some models are that they buy the panels, and often you will probably get more of a reduction on your electricity bill because you are putting up the capital, but you have to put up the capital, some capital. It's not as much as putting solar panels on your house necessarily. But that model is not as common now. So those exist, but the subscription model is much more common, mainly because it still requires that capital, that upfront capital. And there are struggles with what you do if you move, right? What happens with those panels? Can you sell them back? Like, so there are challenges with that model.
Rachel, who maintains.
Yep, great question. So,
Be better. We-
oh, thank you. So the question is, who maintains a solar site, regardless of what it is? If it's community solar or utility scale, generally there's a contract. So the developer will have a 5-10 year contract with an installer who, you'll basically say, okay, there's proactive maintenance, there's reactive maintenance, there'll be a whole bunch of requirements. And so that's contracted before the system ever goes live. And it can be changed, but it just depends. It's just like anything, any other contract. It could be 5 years, 10 years, and could be renewed, or if they're not doing a good job, you can switch, but that's always determined before the system goes live. At least in all the projects I've been involved in. Okay, so just real quickly, this is the point I wanted to share. So New York's position as the leading community solar market in the US, with nearly 1/3 of the nation's 6.2 gigawatts of community solar. So we're doing awesome in community solar. And you can also see, there's a report from Wood Mackenzie on solar. But I'm not sure what the other states are. I know Illinois has a lot of community solar now. But I don't know what the other states are that are close to us. All right. This is, we were a trailblazer in 2018. So Broome County contracted with Tesla to do this project. And that power is, assigned to the county office building, the arena, the airport. So that was cool. Because that was,
That's in Conklin. So where is this?
I don't know exactly where it is in
It's,
Conklin.
Maybe
Oh yeah, there it is.
Park.
Corporate Parkway.
Corporate Park.
Yeah. He asked where it was, and it's that first bullet, 399 Corporate Parkway in Conklin.
And there's another one, Rachel, past in the Kill.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm sure there are more now. I just thought that was cool that we were an early adopter in 2018. So this slide, I already talked about this, but this is a great, if you guys listen to podcasts, this is by Alliance for Clean Energy, and they have basically 15-minute episodes talking about all different types of clean energy, like really easily absorbed, right? They do a great job of breaking things down. So if you want to learn more, I would recommend checking out that podcast, plugging in. Okay, so onshore wind, we'll talk about it just briefly. So New York State has about 4.3 gigawatts of installed onshore wind. This was not like a real focus at the beginning of the Climate Act. They were more focused on offshore wind. But there were several offshore wind projects, which I'll talk about on the next slide, that were awarded. And because of all of the supply chain issues, COVID, inflation, and some technical reasons, they were terminated. And so now they're trying to make up for some of that offshore wind with onshore wind. I think that's the main point for that one. So the next slide is offshore wind. So there was a goal of 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. And there were these 4 gigawatts of projects awarded in November 2023. Oh, sorry, let me go back. There were 3 projects awarded. Oh, it was the 2022 solicitation. And there were the 4 gigawatts of projects. And these are the ones that I'm talking about that were abandoned, unfortunately. So now we have this huge gap, 4 gigawatts to make up. And that's why they're trying to promote more solar, more onshore wind, to make up for that gap. The South Fork farm, that is actually operating. It's just off of Long Island over here. And it looks like this is another one that has been awarded, Empire Wind. So both off of Long Island.
So the projects were dropped because the investor didn't think he could get them.
Yeah, so they basically were awarded the project, had their economics. So this is a problem with all these projects. You have your economics set for, the 2 years you've developed the project, then something shifts, costs go up, and they can no longer afford to build the project. And so that's what happened with those 3 offshore wind projects.
Interest rates. I think,
Yes, that's right. Interest rates. Yeah.
And they
I think I was using inflation, but you're right. Interest rates.
They were gonna be about 3 miles out.
I don't know how far out they're supposed to be.
farther, I think, but.
Even further.
And supply chain was also a problem. It happened as partly because of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So costs went up for multiple reasons, and then the PSC, they like, the pressure was all on the PSC to say, oh, can we reopen the financials in terms of the selling price for the electricity, to raise it. And they didn't want to do it because politically they would have been criticized for allowing the ratepayers to have to pay more for electricity from wind.
Right.
So they just drew a hard line and said, no, we're not going to reopen this, and you're going to have to rebid. So that's what happened.
Right. Did you guys hear Valdi on the phone? Probably not.
We heard that, yes. Thank you.
Oh, great.
That came through.
Okay, awesome. Lovely. Okay, so just real briefly, because Valdi had heard that I worked for a distributed wind company for a brief period. I just wanted to mention that, vertical axis wind turbines do exist. They do work. I gave 2 different examples here. So some can go up to like a couple hundred kilowatts, but generally they're pretty small. They generally produce between 1 kilowatt and 5 kilowatts of power. The reality is that solar is generally more cost effective than these smaller wind turbines, but they can be used in certain areas like, urban environments where you can't put solar panels. So they do have some applications. They just don't account for much of the generation in New York right now. And the type of turbine, so this is a vertical axis turbine as well. So the blades spin this way. And this was a company I worked for, Hover Energy. And the way that this works is it's like inside of a box, essentially. It sits on the edge of a building. You can see 6 of them here. And the idea is that in an urban environment, the wind or the airflow kind of comes up and over the building, right? And so there's like a little sort of lip, and the turbine control system moves the turbine to face it in the wind. And then there's like a diverter, and the wind is supposed to come through, spin the turbine, go out the back. And it's a really cool idea. There was one operational, and the goal was to produce about 55,000 kilowatt hours annually, but unfortunately it didn't really get that close to that. So they went back to, R&D, doing some research and development. That's where they are right now, trying to redesign it and figure out, why didn't the operational match the theoretical? So I'm no longer with them. I don't know how they're doing exactly, but, I'm sure we'll know, because these things are hard to miss.
But that was only to supply energy for that building. not
That's
for the
right.
grid.
That's right. That would only be for the building. Mhm. Okay, battery storage. So, as I mentioned, battery storage is really important for basically stabilizing the grid when you have a lot of intermittent renewable energy. The goal was 6 gigawatts of energy. We've got about 370 megawatts, so a long way to go in battery storage, a lot to make up. And in Broome County, we've got 20 megawatts in 26 projects. And you know, it's when you look at it, there's this graph is you can get this graph when you click on that. I just didn't post it in. It was all in 2010. I don't know what happened do you know what happened?
I don't know why it's slowed down to nothing, but I know that there's a project in the works right now. They're actively digging with huge earth moving equipment. It's on Robinson Hill Road, diagonally across from the 2 substations where 2 huge high voltage transmission lines cross each other.
Okay. Okay.
So this is a company called Glide Path in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
They got the approval to build it about 2 years ago. And I was constantly watching, like about every month or so, to see on the internet, is there any news? And then I would drive by where I knew they were going to put this.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw activity in the spring where they started to make the driveway and then it slowed down and stopped again. And now just 3 weeks ago, now they're really working on it
Okay.
full bore, and they've made a path about 40 feet wide, maybe 200 feet into the woods along this hillside. So they're going to start terracing it, and it's going to be 120 megawatts
Yay!
on that site.
Oh, that's great.
180 megawatt hour capacity for the 4 hour typically that it can store.
Sure. Yes, that's wonderful. I mean,
It's a big one.
that's huge. Yeah.
Biggest, it'll be the biggest in New York State to date.
Wow. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you. I expect you guys heard Baldy, right?
We did, thank you.
Okay, great. So, okay, so this is the thing. This is the plan. This New York Energy Storage Roadmap 2.0. It's approved in June 2024. These are their suggestions for how they're going to close the gap. They have this new index storage credit mechanism that tries to de-risk the investment for storage developers. They still have this community benefits requirement. The thing that I wanted to talk about later, just briefly, is these non-wires alternatives. I'm not even going to talk about it here. I'll talk about it later, but they're trying to encourage this. And then, of course, they have a really big focus on fire safety and labor. We did have 2 projects that caught on fire in New York State. So they have gone back to, find out the root cause of those issues and then, obviously prevent that from the future. I can tell you from going to battery conferences, it's safety, 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 right? So it is the top of mind for everybody who's in the industry, because there are risks associated with it, but they can be mitigated. This is another, well, it's the whole slide isn't fitting in here, but New Energy New York is an awesome organization affiliated with Binghamton University. Their goal is basically to bring battery manufacturing back to New York. They're helping with supply chains. They're helping with, battery development, workforce development, supply chain initiatives. They're also interested in both manufacturing of batteries and battery recycling to ensure a circular economy so that we don't have to keep relying on mining. Recycling can be like pretty chemically intensive process, but it's necessary, right, for us to reuse the materials that we've already, deployed versus mining new places. So, okay. And then there's community engagement, equity, justice, peace. I'm just going to speed through here, guys, because got to get home to my baby girl. So just briefly, I also worked on a microgrids project with the smart grid company. This example that I've shown is in Hydro-Quebec. I'm not sure if you guys remember, but in 2013, there was this huge rail disaster in Lac-Mégantic. It basically flattened the town. There were, I think, like 40 plus fatalities. It was pretty tragic. And after that happened, that town decided no more fossil fuels. We're going to create a new smart city, and we're going to create a microgrid. So they collaborated with Hydro-Quebec and built this microgrid around that basically provided power to 30 different buildings. 6 of the buildings had solar or batteries or building management systems on them, like a different mixture. So that would supply the building itself with power. And then there were also 2 what we call in front of meter projects, which are basically going directly to the grid and are not going to a building first. And so it was 500 kilowatts of solar and then about 500 kilowatts of battery storage. And this was a super cool project. There were so many different bells and whistles on this, but the main goal was to provide power to this part of the town in the event of a power outage, right? Which it was successfully done. I was there when it happened. It was very intense, but it worked. And so, you know, I personally think that microgrids, every community should have one, because it's the place where, you know, vulnerable communities can go when they don't have heat or air conditioning. And then also, like, if you include your fire department and your police department and all of your emergency, what do you call them?
EMS.
Yeah.
Communications.
Yeah, the emergency groups, like within that microgrid, like we're just going to be a lot better off as a community, especially if we have more cybersecurity grid issues, and climate events, right? They're going to be more common, and this is a way to isolate certain sections of the grid and allow them to continue operating. So the main benefits are obviously energy resilience and grid reliability. And this project is still operational, still working really well. And there were also a whole bunch of things that the battery would do when there wasn't a power outage, which is most of the time. So one of the things that it would do is that as part of demand response events during the winter, which was when Hydro-Quebec has their highest load, essentially the utility would control the battery, and they would schedule it to discharge during the expected peaks during the next day to reduce, to basically provide generation during those times, to reduce the risk of an outage. So I'm all for microgrids. They're very expensive, but you know, when you have a community disaster, you know, what's the price on that?
That was community owned. It wasn't a private company?
The funds for it, I think a lot of the funds came from the disaster, from what, I don't remember the company, but they got, you know, millions of dollars in settlement from that. I don't know how the money flowed down. I'm sure the town got some. They're probably the ones who contracted with Hydro-Quebec, but I'm not entirely sure how the funds. Okay, so this is the non-wires alternative that I want to talk about just briefly. So there's this really cool thing that you can do now. And this company that I worked for, Smart Grid Solutions, had the first demonstration project with NYSERDA and with RG&E and NYSEG. Maybe it started 3 or 4 years ago now. And the example is, the first one is an RG&E. There are 3 PV sites that are each 5 megawatts. They're all actually developed next to each other. In this case, they're all very close together near a substation. And the substation had a capacity limit. And so traditionally, what would happen is in order to develop 15 megawatts, they would have to upgrade the substation, right? They would have to upgrade the transformer or whatever it is. And instead, what they do is basically they do a study on the grid demand and the generation and the constraints on the grid. And what our company did is during the times when there was a constraint on the grid, and the constraint in this case is the demand on the grid is very low and the generation is too high. So there's like a thermal problem. There's too much current going to the transformer, and that would not be allowed. So during these times, our control system would basically curtail the PV, which would eliminate the constraint. And then once the load came back up, we could release the plant and let it generate what it's normally generating. This would happen maybe less than 1% of the year, like very minimally. And from the time that it was operational, I only think it hit the constraint one time. So this is what they're talking about with non-wires alternatives. The idea is that you can control, instead of upgrading everything, you can basically deploy a whole bunch of renewable energy. And during those very small periods of time in which you've got over generation, you just curtail the plant. It's a really like eloquent controls methodology. Yes.
It is done automatically by the system?
Yes.
So no human needed?
Nope. It's done automatically. It hits a set point and shuts down. And it also can
Go back.
release on its own, but that's very much dependent upon the reason it shut down. And the utility sort of determines like what types of, or I'm sorry, not shut down, why it cut back. So if they see something else that might indicate a problem, they might not release it, or they may stop the release. So they have manual control, but it does do everything automatically. So it's a really cool system, and you can do it for other constraints. So the one at NYSEG was a voltage constraint, so same idea. And then of course so this was just this is their press release or whatever on the project. So this is another non-wires alternative. So the idea here is instead of upgrading the infrastructure, you put in a battery, right? You put in a battery that can discharge at peak loads and basically manage the constraint in that way. So this was another project that we did that would supply power to the grid during peak demands when the utility needed it. And in addition, the developer could sell the battery's power into the New York ISO market. So it was doing both things. And this is what we kind of call battery stacking. The battery can provide multiple different benefits to the grid, and the developer can get paid for all of those different benefits. And that's how they make the project worthwhile. So these are two new, like really cool and like not easy, because there still requires some standardization to get these to move quickly, but certainly a way to mitigate costs of infrastructure upgrades and get more renewables connected to the grid faster.
That would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it happened only once, how feasible is doing this the second way?
With the batteries?
Yeah, if it only happened just once.
Okay, so
they
and the other,
repeat it.
so the question is, if it only happened one time, why would the second case be required with the battery? So these are two different cases. So one is the grid has not enough load, so not enough people are using electricity, and you have a lot of power being generated at the grid. This all, it's a sunny day, the solar is, just the sun is shining, the solar is producing at maximum, and everybody's on vacation, right? And they have shut down all the electricity on their house. So we have too much generation. In this case, that doesn't happen very frequently. So we're just curtailing the plant. In the battery case, this is a different type of use case. So this is the opposite. This is when everybody is using all of their energy and we don't have enough generation. And the battery is discharging quickly to manage the increase in generation. So they're two different use cases, sort of opposite.
Okay.
Yep.
No.
Cool. All right. So this is one other company that my friend actually works for. It's called 9 Dot Energy, and they're doing this stuff in New York City, actually. So, which is very hard to cite in New York City, but they have a couple different batteries, next to neighborhoods, right? Where it's basically mitigating some grid congestion and kind of doing what I just described. They're a great company. They do a lot of community outreach. This is a mural that they did with the neighborhood. They do a lot of STEM stuff in schools. So they've got about 3 or 4 projects in New York and are growing. So just wanted to mention them.
Rachel's product, the Northeast Bronx there. What is projected use by the 5 boroughs of New York City as far as the percentage of electricity that city is going to use on this grid?
Ask that one more time. And I don't think I can answer the question, but ask it one more time.
Okay. So the 5 boroughs of New York City are
Yep.
on the grid.
Yes.
Is there any projections of how much energy they
Oh,
use?
right. Right.
Percentage.
Yes. I'm sure that exists. I don't know what that is. The question was how much, what percentage electricity does New York City use in comparison to the rest of the state? Yeah, I don't know the answer.
You could come up with an estimate by looking at total population of New York State.
Oh, no, you know what? You could look at that New York, you guys didn't see it because this was when I didn't have slides, but
Oh,
let me go back. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, it's all the way back to the beginning. Okay. So this is the New York ISO load.
Yep.
So you could get an idea. You could basically see like this screenshot, the load for the state is 17,000 megawatts, let's just say. And you can see down here, like, I think these are all like Long Island, New York. You could kind of add those up. And I mean, this is just an instantaneous moment in time. So, it's going to be a range. But you could get an idea from looking at that. So this is so just to come back to it, this New York ISO grid has so much information, just tells you like the load everywhere in the state. You can click into it and see like, the hourly electricity fluctuation. And then you can also see the real-time pricing and day ahead pricing. If you really want to nerd out. Okay, I'm almost done. We talked about NENY. Oh, this was another thing. This is on Volt's podcast. This is a great podcast for anybody who wants to learn about clean energy. This is like one of kind of like simple things you could do for improving infrastructure. So essentially, you can reconductor the lines in order that you get increased line capacity. So, don't ask me how this is done. I have no idea. But essentially they can, use a different type of reconductor material that allows for, an increase in capacity by like 100%. The problem with this is utility companies are essentially paid based on capital improvements, large capital improvements. And this would not be a large capital improvement. This probably would not get them a lot of money to do this. So they're not really incentivized to do things like this. Is that a fair statement?
you're probably right, but this is another thing that probably the people in Albany that should be working on this, they need to come up with an incentive to make this happen.
To make it happen, I agree. Yeah.
Because this is a relatively easy thing.
Yes.
You don't have to come up with new rights of way to add transmission capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I hope they're working on it, but I have no idea.
Right. I'm not sure either. So this is the link to the Volts podcast. Well, obviously you'll have to have the presentation in order to check it out. But yeah, there's stuff like this out there, right? There's improvements in technology that make our current grid even better. But a couple things that I knew I wasn't going to have time for: demand response and what we call virtual power plants, which is a terrible name. But essentially, what this means is the utility has contracts with industries. So, for example, the first company I worked for, Praxair, our plants used an incredible amount of energy, like 30 megawatts of power. And so we would contract with the utility in the event of a emergency that we would shut down our plants like instantaneously so that the whole grid wouldn't go down. And we got paid a lot of money to do that. This is in Houston. And so that is the idea of demand response. The utilities basically can shut your power off or reduce it to a certain degree when there is a grid emergency. So this can also happen on the individual level. So for example, if we all said, okay, the utility can have control of our HVAC system and you're allowed to move it 3 degrees in the event of an emergency, right? They can congregate, they can consolidate, yeah, like all of everyone's HVAC system. And if they're able to control all of it, that can actually, you know, end up being a decent amount of electricity that they can manage. And basically either, well, I guess you would be for HVAC systems, you're going to make it warmer, right? They're going to raise your HVAC set point by 3 or 4, whatever degrees, in order to reduce the load on the grid.
If it's an air conditioning motor, if it's using electricity through a heat pump to heat the house,
Yes.
then you would lower your thermostat set point to reduce the heating load. And
Exactly.
you can do this type of thing by interrupting electric vehicle charging too.
Exactly.
So if somebody is charging their vehicle overnight, they're not going to drive their car anyway. If you set up the incentives correctly, you can get paid to not be charging your car for a certain time window that where the power company needs it. So there's a lot of creative things that can be used to make this happen. But I don't know that there's enough speed on this stuff to create the incentive structure and the billing and all that type of thing, because that requires standardization, coordination. You need to have the software work. You need to standardize the interfaces, all that stuff too. So there's a lot that needs to happen, but the ideas have been out there for years.
And there are a lot of there are co-ops in the Midwest who have had control of people's water heaters for ages, and they just stop the water heater from heating, you know, so that everybody can have power. Okay, you can't take a shower for 8 hours, or you take a cold one, it's not the end of the world. So the other thing I was going to say, so demand response. Oh, that was a good point. I didn't mention that the incentive is that you get paid, right, for the times that you are letting the utility maneuver your HVAC or whatever it
Plus,
is.
there's vehicle to grid too. So if a car is built so that the car battery can put power from its battery onto the grid, you can get paid for that too. So your car connected as a mini grid connected batteries, so it can serve as energy storage. So the downside is that hurts the lifespan of your car's batteries to some extent. But if you're getting enough payment for that, maybe it's worth your while.
Exactly. So the company that I talked about, 9 is doing a pilot of vehicle to grid, that exact thing. So I don't think we're there yet, but that's coming. The other thing that, just to speak about incentives, you know, Canada and certain states have time of use power, which essentially means that you pay higher prices for your energy depending on how much demand is on the grid. So if it's 6 p.m. and everybody's at home using all of their power, the price of electricity will be higher, and that will make people think, okay, I don't want to pay these high electricity prices. I am going to wait to run my washer and dryer until 11 p.m. when prices are lower. No, so now I'm not sure that there might be plans, there might be ESCO plans that do time of use. I don't know, but I don't.
People are looking at day-night rate that's only one shift.
Right.
So that's only 2 different rates, whereas I think what you're talking about is a more time windows.
Yes.
And more flexible pricing, depending on if it's a huge peak where people come home
Mm-hmm.
and people usually turn on their cooking, their air conditioner, they might set that at a lower temperature to cool the home down more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a more flexible thing, I think, what she's talking about, that you could.
But day-night metering does that when everybody's sleeping, you have cheap electricity.
Oh,
We don't have that.
Talking about beyond
We do
that.
too. It's on my house.
so you have a smart meter, right? So
Everybody's got them now.
well, not most people do. But you're right. 70% of the United States have smart meters now, so it's mostly deployed. But the smart meter is mainly to just track your energy on a 15-minute interval, so that your utility guy doesn't have to come out, or woman doesn't have to come out and read your utility. They get the basically real-time data from your house. But to your point, your prices, if your plan is that you pay real-time pricing, then you would be paying whatever the grid rate is. But generally your plan will say you pay whatever it is, I don't know, 12 cents a kilowatt hour consistently, no matter what the price of power is on the grid. So, so there's a lot of different plans. This is a presentation in itself, but unless you have a very specific plan that allows you to, that is sort of like time of use, which you may have, I think most people pay. Okay, so you have a day night. Ah, okay, I see. So, okay, so who's the ESCO that you go through?
That's NICEAG.
Oh, NICEAG has that plan. Cool.
But that's not.
But I think you have to
most
choose
people
that.
don't have that.
Right,
Yeah,
you've
but
chosen
not
that.
all house. I didn't choose it.
You know,
The
but
gas
it's-
shortage in the 70s chose it. You couldn't have gas,
Right.
installed.
But I guess
So
what I'm saying is
it
that,
was built when that was
So
on.
it's been since the
I
seventies.
think you're talking beyond that, though.
Because.
This is just two fixed rates.
yeah, I am. I'm just,
Rate is
I'm
lower.
just trying to like get clear that she already does potentially have one, but you have chosen that plan and not all NICEAG customers have that plan. That's all I'm saying.
Used to live out west. I came into this area in 1980, so back in the 70s, there was day and night rates.
Yes,
And you,
yeah.
if you used your appliances at night instead of in the daytime, it cost you less. I got here and it was like, oh no, we don't have that here, and I've never heard of it being here ever since. I don't know why.
I've had it for years. I thought they.
How do you
I
get
thought
it?
that was, because you sign up for it.
How do you sign up for it? You ask them for it?
Yeah.
So it's you can also probably find it, there's like a power to choose site where you can see all the different plans. Because there's a million different plans out there that you can choose from. I don't know if it's from NICEAG, but from other ESCOs.
You'd have to go to one of those, but then you pay more per kilowatt hour for most of those, don't you?
Actually, I think that a lot of them are probably
Ours is
less.
NICEAG. So NICEAG has it.
Really, and they
Yeah.
have these day-night things?
Yeah.
Maybe
It's cheaper at night and it's more.
So you'll have to do an article in the next
I didn't think this was that complicated, but.
No, I know, but a lot of people don't know what plans are out there, right?
There's no
Like,
such thing here.
yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Have you ever worked in a publication, like taking the grid from the NICEAG and making it public, owned by a county or a city? So that it's, I think Green has it, and I believe Endicott has somehow.
Like a community,
Do you-
community
owned.
Oh, do you mean like municipally owned?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I live in Endicott and I get municipal electric, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is very different. So if you're in municipal, you don't have a choice. Like you pay whatever, Endicott Power and Light, whatever that rate is. So there are different structures of utilities all across the country. There's like,
The municipal ones are cheaper because there is no profit.
that is true.
Yeah,
They,
that's
at
what-
least,
If we nationalized our whole grid, then our electricity would be cheaper.
Because there would be more people into the pot.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah.
But
I'm not a market analyst, so I don't know if that is true or not, but it's certainly an option. Yeah,
Endicott's cheaper because they get hydropower from Niagara.
that is correct. That is also
And
true.
That's
Yeah.
what they have a cheaper source
Yeah.
of electricity. And the municipal part is another thing, but they also can't afford to fix their transformers, so the one that powers the library, the Endicott Library, is always going out all the
Ah,
time. because
interesting.
Endicott, Village of Endicott doesn't have the money to fix it.
To fix it, yeah. Okay, so I don't know if you guys heard that, but basically we were talking about Endicott's municipal electric and how it is cheaper, mainly because they have contracts, I think it's with NYPA, hydroelectric, so we get hydroelectric power. And that even though we have cheap electricity, the Endicott Light and Power, I think is Endicott Light, they don't necessarily have the funds to be upgrading the infrastructure. And so there are certain areas of town that might have that might have more problems. Okay, last thing, some of the ways that you can help reach climate goals without, joining the renewable energy industry is finding out if you guys want to learn anything about on doing things to your home, energy efficiency projects, heat pumps, solar. You could reach out to an energy hub, a regional clean energy hub, or a community-based organization like Network for Sustainable Tomorrow. If you want to do anything to your house, I know Adam Flint, you probably know Adam Flint, and he will tell you what you can do for your house and what incentives exist. And so any of those things. Support renewable energy projects, minimize NIMBY, right? Go to meetings, write letters. I imagine you guys do all these things. And I know you're trying to get people to do that, Waldy. Post on social media, right? About what you're doing. If you use social media, educate people. A lot of people still think that solar causes cancer and, you know, that wind hurts more bats than oil and gas does, right? So any education you can do on social media, I think is beneficial. Vote for candidates that support clean energy, donate to organizations that support renewables and energy or renewables. So that is my list. And this is our hub. That's the line. That's the phone number and the email for our hub. And that's it. I had about 40 more slides that I had to put into archive. Yeah, it was a lot. So any burning questions?
Did you say at the beginning
Mhm.
that 25% of the energy in New York State is renewable? Did I hear you say that? And then
Yes.
Then of that 25%, something like 85% was hydro.
Yep, right here.
Is that correct?
Right here.
Yeah.
So
I just
86%.
It
So
just sounded high to me, but
I know.
is
I
that
know.
Niagara Falls? That,
I think
and
mainly,
St.
and then
Lawrence?
some.
In the St. Lawrence, I know Tupper Lake where I lived, there's a water benefit, so the electric is less,
Yeah,
from hydro.
yeah. I mean, it says
Okay.
it's 86%.
high.
So
That's-
no, I know it's great. This is NYSERDA. So you can go look it up on the website. I know it's crazy. I was surprised by it too.
That's what environmentalists have been complaining about for years now, when New York State brags about how well it's doing on renewable energy. Most of it is hydropower that we've had since the 1960s.
Yes, we've had it for a while. Yeah. If there is anybody still online, I don't know if they are. I think they're gone.
No, we're here.
Oh, you're here. Okay.
we're-
Hello. I have to run pretty soon. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you again, Sierra Club, for having me. This was really fun. Thanks for all the questions. That made it fun. Yeah. I am that. I have a 2.5-year-old. Like I have to be high energy, which I have to go home to. So thank you very much. Would you have? Oh yeah, of the hub.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks from us. Yeah.
There it is, right there.